think we should have come on to a round of applause, actually. I can't see anything, but hello. Who is it? How is Roger? Talk to you afterwards. Are you coming to the lunchtime, Michael? Are you coming to the lunchtime concert on Wednesday? Is it? It's going to be brilliant. That's Wyndham Powell. So where is Linda?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is lovely to welcome you all to the Riverhouse today for our talk with Susan Segal as part of the Past, Present and Future event we're hosting at the moment. I can see so many familiar faces, and I'm pretty sure that the majority of you know Susan so well that there's very little introduction that needs to be made, but I'm going to just say a few words, if I may. First of all, before I introduce this talk, I just want to say that on behalf of the directors of the Riverhouse, of which I think I'm the newest director of the Riverhouse, we want to thank a great many of you who are in the audience today for the contribution that you have made to Riverhouse over the years. Whether that's founding it literally with your bare hands, helping put this place together, volunteering and offering your time and efforts in so many ways. It's really important to us and it's very much appreciated, as is the very kind support of Friends of the Riverhouse as well. And I can spot a few fellow directors. At least I've spotted Dave and I've spotted Loretta. Roger, I think, is in America as we speak, so he can't be here to say hello. I'm sure a lot of you in this room have some memory of the first time you met Susan. I certainly do. and I can see some shaking heads there, but that's fair enough because I see Susan's two children sitting there, who probably, it is difficult to cast your mind back to just that moment. And just over a decade ago, when I moved to Walton-on-Thames, I remember wandering to the Riverhouse and sort of thinking it was a lovely place. And there was one occasion where I met this amazing lady who was just clearly an absolute tour de force. And she eventually persuaded me that I should be volunteering. I was happy initially to help out with the cafe, bits and pieces, and then it emerged that I was a barrister like her son, and perhaps I could lend some other assistance. And before you knew it, it's a great privilege for me, but yes, I became a director of Riverhouse. But the very strange thing is that the coincidence that later emerged took some time to emerge, which is that Susan's son Oliver, who is in the audience there next to his sister, is actually my head of chambers. And it took a good year and a bit, I think, before that particular coincidence came to light. But I was immediately struck by Susan's vital energy and this sort of can-do spirit which she brings to everything she does. And indeed, she was a founder of the Riverhouse. She is someone who keeps its history in many ways, but actually she's also someone who, to this day, gets any number of emails and phone calls when we need advice or a steer or any number of things that only Susan can provide. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to Susan, who's going to talk us through the history. There will be an interval about halfway through, about 20 minutes. You can get refreshments, you can pop up and have a look at the exhibition. So that will be, yes, about halfway through. And I'm just going to start by asking you this, Susan, before I hand over to you. When was the first time you encountered this building?
It's a very good question. It's 40 years, almost exactly, that I first came into this building. And it was very different. Actually, mustn't stand up as quickly as that. The one above me makes it look better than it did, because when I first came, there was this roof, a ceiling across, and there were divisions. So the place was divided into sections, and you couldn't see the length of the barn anywhere. And Frank Cottrell, who was showing me around as builder, made me go up, climb up, where I could see the length of the building above the ceiling. And that was the first time I really got an impression of the size and what it was like. And there's a wonderful moment when, and no photograph has been taken of that, as far as, not me going up, but of the ceiling on. And one of the first things we did when we got the building was Brian knocked a hole in it. And those of you who will remember him, unfortunately he's not with us today, he's in Australia. He was a very good-looking man. And the sun came through a window and shone on him. And it was as though somehow the angel Gabriel had come down from... I'll never forget that moment. And that was 40 years ago. It's also 60 years since I moved into Walton, into Manor Road, indeed. And I've lived in Manor Road for the last 60 years. I have to say that I moved not to Walton, which I didn't even know where it was, what it was. We moved to a house. We actually moved to the old manor house, my husband and I, those of you who know it, off the road. And this was we could hardly find it, Walton, not the house. And I've lived there virtually ever since. And I think the reason why this Riverhouse is here, and the reason why it has survived when lots of similar ventures didn't, was the history of what happened after I arrived, nothing to do with me. I've got my thing here so I get the dates right. We moved into Walton, which was at that time part of the Walton and Weybridge District Council, with headquarters on Ashley Park. In 1974, i.e. 10 years later, we were absorbed into Elmbridge Borough Council, along with, I think it's 9 villages around the district. And Walton somehow got absorbed, and there was a feeling that we didn't have control over ourselves at all. And there was some rather, can I put it politely, dicey planning permissions which were given locally. And somebody came, a group of people came and approached Ronald, my husband, who was totally uninterested really in politics, local politics. He was an international politician, came from South Africa, and that was what he was used to. And they asked him to become chairman of a newly formed Walton Society, which was formed to unite the people of Walton, if you like, get them interested, working and everything. And one of the first things we did, in fact, as the Walton Society, was fight the decision to knock down the house opposite the Manor House, which was a lovely house in lovely grounds owned by Mrs. Miskin. Everybody know Gridley Miskin? Mrs. Miskin owned that house, and every year the Walton Regatta was held on her lawn. It was very much part of it. And some developers came along and wanted to knock it down and build some flats. And the Walton Society said, we don't want that, we'll be turning like Kingston if we're not careful. Anyhow, we lost that battle. Hill rise went up, and it's very charming, and in fact, we haven't become like Kingston for all sorts of reasons. So in 1975, the Walton Society is formed, and one of the things they did as a society was form committees to shadow the council committees. And I served at that time on the leisure committee, which was shadowing what was going on in leisure around Walton. And it was chaired by a lovely chap called Brian Cottrell, who owned a buildings company, which is going to be relevant, called Contrad, and he also ran a children's drama group. Now, the call for an arts centre in Walton had been going on for some time. Just to go back in history even more, for those of you who may not know it, Walton in the 20s and 30s was a thriving centre of cinema. Those were the dates, 20s, 30s, Hepworth. There were 3 cinemas in Walton. There were 2 when we arrived. There was one until 1970, the Odeon. And it was only because of the Walton Society that when the Odeon closed that we managed to persuade the Everyman to come. But there was no performing centre in Walton. When my children were growing up, what is now the Playhouse was used for the hop of notoriety. I don't know what went on there. And then it stopped being used for the hop and it was taken over and it was used, it is still being used, mainly for amateur productions. But there was nowhere for professional companies to come, certainly in Walton and Weybridge. In fact, and I'm looking now at Loretta, I don't think anywhere in the borough of Elmbridge. And there were calls for an arts centre to be formed. And we, as the leisure committee, sat on the floor of Brown's Kitchen in Highfield Road, and Riverhouse was conceived. That sounds awful. We did have coffee and biscuits at the same time. And the first problem was finding somewhere to put it. Now, this was 1976, probably. Property prices were zooming around here. And what became absolutely apparent that if we were going to do anything, we needed to find something in public ownership. So they started looking around. Which brings us to Riverhouse. Riverhouse, which is the house actually, and the barn, were part of the Elmbridge Parks and Gardens remit, something. In the bungalow lived Tom Spragg, who ran it. This was full of old equipment. On the other side of that wall was a corrugated iron office, which was Tom's office. And on the other side, there were 2 brick garages, one of which was used by St. John's Ambulance. The car park was used for the greenhouses. It was full of greenhouses. Go a little bit further was the Walton and Weybridge dump. I don't know what you call the place where dustbins are emptied. I don't think it actually is a dump. Anyhow, it's where all the dustbins used to go. Once we got into Elmbridge, none of this was needed. It all moved to Esher. And so this building was not being used. The dump was not being used, except when it was being inhabited by gypsies. And the car park, the glass houses were all falling down. The whole thing was derelict. And Brown said, this is what we need to do. We need to take over the house, Riverhouse, which was also owned by the council, 4 flats. We need to turn that into, build the most wonderful theatre at the end of it, overlooking the river. Turn the house into a cafe, working studios for artists, and the barn can be the studio theatre. Just as if any of you know Coventry, for instance, is the only one I know well. You have a main theatre, and then you have, Guildford. We don't need to go to Coventry. You have the Yvonne Arnaud, and you have the Arts Centre. Only we did realise fairly quickly that was going to be a little bit expensive and not actually doable. So we concentrated on the barn, and we wanted to make the barn into a space. The whole thing was in the ownership of the local borough council. So the first thing we had to do was to persuade the borough council to let us do that. That was quite a battle, for all sorts of reasons, which I won't go into. And in '85, we started the battle, so that was, how many years? 10 years after the Walton Society was formed. And the Walton Society was very vociferous, and we used to attend all meetings, council meetings, and I used to come out into the car park and throw bricks because of what's happening and how it can go. Anyhow, there was a public meeting in the Playhouse, attended by representatives of most of the local arts societies and groups. I think the number I saw was 165 people there. And one of them was a lovely councillor called Harry Cohen, who came from Weybridge, was a sort of grandee of the council, and he came back and said to the councillors, enough of this. There's a large amount of public support for this. You should give your permission. Give it to them. Give them a lease. I've told you all that because I think that whole conception is one of the reasons why we are as successful as we've been. This centre grew out of the community. It wasn't imposed on it or given to it by a local council. The people of the community created it and then supported it. I have a thing about the smell. If you go into an arts centre or theatre which is run by the local council, I don't mean here, I mean anyway, it has a very distinctive smell, particularly the toilets. And I have a theory that there is somewhere in this country which sells disinfectant to all the councils in the country, and they all smell the same. Anyhow, we don't. We may not approve of the smell, but we don't smell of it. And I must look at my things. The first thing was we were given permission to take it over. No lease, no planning permission. So the first thing we had to do was get the planning permission to do what we wanted to do, which was to convert this into a performance space, to build a link building where the corrugated iron office was, and knock through into the brick garages to have a small bar and public toilets. And before we then went any further, we had to find an architect. And along came Roger Wing, who was a local architect who specialised in conservation work, and he was absolutely fantastic. And he worked alongside a colleague of his called Martin Close, who is a, what are you, Martin? Is it called, but what are you? You're not a structural engineer, you're a... Heating and electrical engineer. That's what he was. So between them, they designed and ran the place. Meanwhile, Brian Cottrell was actually a builder. So under their guidance, we then got together members of the community to do the work. And work started here in 1986. 1986. Seems an awful long time ago. What is so wonderful is how many of you are still here. And our children. There aren't any grandchildren here today. Mine are sort of gone, but, you know, generations have gone through, have grown up with it, have invested in it financially, emotionally, enjoying coming to things. And that's what gives us the success we have. We have moments of crisis, and when we have moments of crisis, such as when we were somehow or other £40,000 in the red, and I went and saw, in those days we had a bank manager, a lovely bank manager at Lloyd's, and said, we're going to have to do something about this. And I wrote to half a dozen people. After all, we live in a wealthy community, or relatively, and said, I want you to lend us £10,000, I don't guarantee we'll pay you back, but will you do so? And they did, and they were all paid back. And I've had to do that in the future. I had to occasionally say, can someone lend us some money? I don't guarantee to pay you back, but I hope I will. It happened over COVID. We needed some money. One person actually lent it to us rather than giving it to us. He was paid back within 2 months. So if I ever come to you and say, will you please lend us some money, my record is very good. But again, this was an investment, not only of money, of emotion, of things. So we got together the plans, and the thing was designed in 3 stages. This first, stage 2 was the building of the dressing room and craft workshop, and stage 3 was the knocking down of the brick garages and the building of a proper cafe and, of course, our wonderful gallery. The council remained slightly tight-fisted till the end. We got our lease on condition we did all 3 parts, and we had to do them within, I think it was, Chris, can you remember what I think the terms were? I think it was something that each one had to be done within 3 years, which was a pretty tall order. In the event, we did. And we got a lease in, when did we get our lease? 1996, 10 years after we started, we got our lease, which is a 50-year lease. And one of the terms of condition in the lease, because I've read it, is that when we leave, we have to give it back in the condition to which we found it. And what really upsets me is I won't be around to be able to go knocking holes in the walls. So in '86, we start work. The original quote, not the estimate, for how much the work was going to be was 300,000. In the event, we did it for just under 100,000. And we did it for just under 100,000 because a lot of the original work was done by volunteers. It was done by, mostly at the weekends, by bank managers, a lot of the local television community who lived here, lighting engineers, oh, so valuable. Sound engineers, again, very valuable, came. It was very misogynist, I have to say. When I'm thinking of these people who worked at BP, they were all men. The women did have very much making tea, cleaning tiles, that kind of work. Although I was always sent up a ladder until they realised that our insurance didn't cover me because the insurance was in the name of the trust that then took over the building. And the first job we had to do was we had to lower the floor in here by about 18 inches, take the hard core that we produced from one end to the other. When it was lowered, we had to take the hard core from that end to that end, and then lower that floor. And then, after all that, and at one point I have to tell you, Ronald, any of you can remember Ronald, used to come down and help. This is my husband. He was fairly effete in many ways. Was heard to say, I'm sure I took this wheelbarrow full of things in the opposite direction last week. To which everybody said, you did, probably you did. Anyhow, the floor is lowered, and then we have to get the concrete put down. And we arranged for the machines to come along and to shoot the concrete into the building. And then all the men put on their wellies and spread it. And the women made the tea and cleaned the wellies. And we did the whole job. It was quoted at 3,000, and we did it for £915.38. And so it went on. We did more and more. One of the great strengths of Roger was that he kept the barn, the character of the barn. But of course, I have got to say, yes, it had holes everywhere. It had beams missing. We had to replace beams. Those 2 beams, what they're called the tie beams, the ones which do this, were missing. And Tom Spragg, who lived opposite and been going in and out of this building for the last, I don't know how many tens of years, when the ceiling was taken off, he realised that the beams were missing and he wouldn't come in again. And we replaced them. There's a big timber there, which is holding up the whole building, which was rotten and had to come out. And Brown Cottrell arranged for a railway sleeper to be delivered. And it came midweek. And I rang Brown and I said, "This railway sleeper has been delivered." He said, "Oh, good, well, just get them to leave it in the courtyard." And there was one man in the lorry, and there was me on the ground, and we looked at the timber, and he said, "Right, if you can just stand at one end," I don't think he actually asked me to hold it, he would drive away from it and leave it in the courtyard, which he did. It then had to be brought in, it had to be cut to size, it then had to be put under those timbers, right? And at one point somebody said, "Susan, can you just sit on one end because we need to make it go up at the other." So for one moment, I held up the whole of one side of the barn. And so it went on. So we took all the tiles off the roof, which were, one of them we discovered had 1721 on it. And these were apparently tiles, I think, which came from Holland originally. I don't know. Anyhow, they were lovely clay tiles. And they all had to be cleaned. And we cleaned them all. And then the roof had to be put on. And before the roof was put on, Roger got an acoustic engineer to come in. And he looked up and he said, "Of course, you're going to have great problems if you leave any gap, as it were, between the timber and the filling in bit. You must fill it in right to the edge of the timber." Well, I have to tell you, somehow we forgot that. It was much easier just to lay the thing on the top of the timbers, which we did. And then we put the insulation on, and then we put the tiles on. And just before we opened, this man came back and said, "But you didn't do what I told you to do." He then tested the acoustic, and he said, "How lucky, you've got a perfect acoustic." And so, I mean, I'm telling you these anecdotes because so many of you either remember it or were there. Your children know about it, my children are bored with the whole story. And we grew up. And we finished it. The first thing we had was a party when the floor was laid, with a leaking roof, potholes, and a string quartet playing. It was opened by our very lovely Member of Parliament, Geoffrey Patty, who was so supportive and was very instrumental in helping us get money. This, I remind you all, was pre-lottery days. There was no lottery money in those days. You had to raise the money from business, from the community, and so on. The council had said to us at the beginning, once we had raised 25,000, they would give us 25,000, which they did. There was a lot of money in those. God, when I've been doing these figures, you look at inflation, I mean, what the price of everything is now. Surrey County Council gave us money for the doors. The doors are, the bottom quarter of the doors was still in existence, but these are all completely new. Am I not right, Martin, that they're actually insulated between the timber? Are they solid timber, or have they got insulation between it? They have got them. So everywhere, it's been insulated. And one of the things the volunteer was stuffing insulation in between the timbers and then putting on the outside. Gridley Miskins didn't give us the timbers to go on the thing, but they gave it to us, I think, almost at cost. So the slats which went on the outside. You may think it's chilly in here sometimes, but believe you me, it was a great deal chillier before we started. And it has been fairly well insulated, but the place looks as it would have done before all that had happened. Have I talked for long enough?
I think you have, Susan, so I think it's a timely moment.
Well, shall I just quickly get... What I'm going to do is we're going to stop, and then it's going to be so much easier for me if you all ask questions after the interval, because I'm very good at answering questions. But let me just give you quickly some more dates. We opened in 1989. The original estimate of 300,000, we got in for 100,000. We opened with 450 friends who had paid £25 each, a lot of money, for a seat that never existed, if you see what I mean. It wasn't like these other places where you go with their names are on the back of everything. We knew we had 115 license for 115 seats, so we sold those. In 1986, we got one of the first lottery funds. We got, how much did we get from the lottery? We got £94,000 from the lottery. It's called the Toshiba Studios because when you got a lottery, you had to get some sort of matching, not matching funding, but you had to show. And Toshiba, who were local in Addleston at that time, gave us 5,000, and the rest of the money was raised by fundraising. More of that possibly later. In 1997, the Kewell Gates, the lovely, lovely wrought iron gates that we've got, which were given to us by... Is Anne here? Anne Overstall? I saw she was coming. No. The Overstalls who had a firm, and they were made by, designed and made in Paul Dennis's things in Cardiff, in the Brecons. They are, as far as we know, the only curved gates that anybody knows of. They were curved so that you could look at them from inside and see them. And they were made by his workmen who at the time were working on replacements for the Windsor Fire. Terribly boring stuff, endless sort of, panels. And they were all allowed to make one animal or one something or other. They came down on the back of a trolley all the way from Wales to arrive to discover that they were that much too short, and Paul blamed Brown, and Brown blamed Paul, and Paul went away and built a small extension. And then in 1999, we got our final lottery application, 50,000, which was matched by funds from the Michael Marks Trust, more actually, 55. Phillips Trust, who are one of our local charities, after whom the gallery was named. Wharton Charities, and the Friends, and fundraising. And that opened in 1999, and we got our lease.
So we're going to take a short interval now. Please do feel free to get some refreshments, or if you want to pop upstairs to have a look at the exhibition, if you haven't already done so, take the opportunity now, or indeed after the second half. And can I really encourage everyone, there's a board up there with a suggestions board. So if you want to put a post-it there as to what you want to see at the Riverhouse, please do that today before you leave. So I'll let you have an interval, and then we will
And the box office is open if anybody hasn't got their lunchtime concert tickets.
So 30 years old. I'm doing an error. I was actually very good. I was better than the gladiator. He was older, he couldn't tell you.
Martin Close left.
Martin. Somebody had it. It was cheaper.
Oh no, really?
The year that I left. No, I was there I live in that kind of like crumbling life. The maintenance, the management. I don't know.
I've known him since 83. I was the youngest. I was still the youngest. Could you? Couldn't must be something. And I didn't have an excuse. So I became the trustees by default. Not because they were this person. Are you still?
Certainly working. Such a long way from it to come to events. Such a long way from there.
To stretch legs, get refreshments, buy tickets as Susan requested, or put suggestions on the board. We're very happy to take, when I say we, I mean Susan, very happy to take questions if you've thought of some over the interval. And if you have, put a hand up.
God, you lousy lot.
Well, I have a question for you, Susan.
Thank you.
And my question is, what is your favourite production that you've seen here or event that's been hosted at the Riverhouse?
I will start this answer to this by telling you that I'm approaching my 83rd birthday. And I find I can't remember what I did yesterday. To ask me to remember what I did seen over 40 years is a bit much. It can be very embarrassing. There is quite a famous cellist called Alexander Bailey, who I once met at a party. I was introduced to him, talked to him, and I said, you really must come and play at Riverhouse. At which point he turned to me and said, I have already. So, what is my favourite performance? What is my favourite? What do I remember? Oh, I don't know. What?
Tread carefully.
Oh, I thought you were going to give me an example. Yeah, we have had Nicola. I was thinking of Nicola, but not necessarily best performer. I tell you what was Stephen Mottram, a puppeteer, the most wonderful puppeteer. And he made puppets, and he did workshops for us. He did puppet shows, he did performances. And he did workshops for us. And I remember coming into the barn, and he was surrounded by a group of kids. And he was saying to them, now, I want you to throw a ball from one side of the thing to the other side. And then I want you to throw. And these kids, and they can't have been 12 at the oldest, had learnt from him how without moving virtually, certainly without any props, certainly without any ball, was to throw a ball from one side of the ring to the other. And I just stood there absolutely amazed because he was so clever and his performances were absolutely wonderful, he did. And I don't know where he is now. I think he actually went to South America where they had a greater love of puppetry than we do here. So I think that is the thing I remember. It's a small thing, but it encapsulated so much of what we do. Original performance, workshops, something unusual. On the classical music side, so many. But just, let's talk about Nicola, because it shows something we do here. The number, particularly of classical musicians, but also of jazz musicians, which I can at least remember one who doesn't quite qualify, who came to us as young artists, partly because of our close proximity to the Menuhin School, and Peter Norris, who was the headmaster in those days, asked us occasionally to give performance, people play-through time, really, which we still do, incidentally, give young artists time to come and play through a concert before they have to perform it, as it were. And Nicola actually had left the Menuhin School, and she'd started the Young Musician of the Year. And Alison Rind, who was the pianist at Menuhin School, asked whether she could come and play through her final performance at the Young Musician before she had to do the competition, which she did. I can remember, where are you, Celia? Celia Andrews, you still with us? Have you gone?
It's over there.
We had comments coming back, and Celia, who's a stage person, I remember saying to Nicola, you must, I think it was clothes, or you must smile more. Hair, well, there was something, it was one of comment, do something about your hair. Anyhow, it wasn't that, but it was, of all levels. And her teacher was in the audience, Matrick, and afterwards talking, she was young, and she went and won the competition, as we all, well, those of us who follow classical music know. And since then, she's become, for all sorts of reasons, one of the most famous violinists in the country. And she continues to support us. She will come here and play for us, raise money. She's a patron now of the barn. And she's not the only one. Alina Ibragimova, who I never can pronounce, they rang and said she's got to do a concert in Paris, which she'd like a playthrough. And I said, well, the only time I can see is after a lunchtime concert. If she'd like to come when the lunchtime concert's finished, I'll ask some of the audience to stay behind to give her an audience. She came and she played unaccompanied Bach. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard her playing unaccompanied Bach, but it is amazing and wonderful. And she also has continued to support us, to come during COVID. during COVID, I heard her do an interview with somebody on a podcast or something. And she just threw out, Alina, perhaps what we're going to have to do is instead of doing whole concerts, we're going to have to do shorter concerts, lots of them, so we can, instead of having 100 people in at a time, we can have 30 people in at a time, and we'll do 3 short concerts. At which point I wrote to her and said, what a wonderful idea. And the perfect place for you to do that is Riverhouse. And she did. And she came, and she did this amazing 3 concerts where she played the Bach partitas. And actually my son was there, and he will vouch for this. It was one of the most moving concerts that we've had, most wonderful. Elspeth, who runs Maestro, who's been listened to more chamber music concerts than any of us can think of in the world, came to me after and said that was the most moving and wonderful concert I've ever heard, because of the circumstances, because of everything, and it was amazing. Now, interestingly, says she, always on the thing to push forthcoming things, she didn't do the whole of each concert. She also brought students of hers, people to her, including, I never can remember her full name, Charlotte. We'll call her Charlotte for the moment. Sadusbue, anyhow, who is wonderful. She's just beginning her career. She is amazing. And she is doing a playthrough in February, which means she's coming here to play before an invited audience. No cost to her, no cost to us. We will take a collection on the door, because she's doing a Wigmore, her first Wigmore, in March. It'll be advertised. Those of you who are interested in classical music, come and hear the next Benedetti. Or I never can pronounce Alina's name. It's terrible. Anyhow, so memorable, I don't know. So many of so many kinds.
But Susan, I think a theme that's really emerged from what you were saying before the interval and what you've just said now is the importance of personal connections. And certainly it struck me that so much of what happens at the Riverhouse is through the goodwill of volunteers and through the goodwill of those personal connections in the community. Can you give me some sense, can you give us all some sense of how you've sort of forged those connections, got that goodwill, the sort of magic touch you have for getting people to sort of show up and do things?
I was thinking about what I was going to say here. I was thinking about this, and why is it that when we started doing the building, say at least 20 people turned up, working during the week, came out. How did we do this? How have we kept people, so many of you? Some people didn't stay, I have to say. There was a couple who came to help. And they didn't like me, and they left. I said, that's all right. I'm not the easiest person to work with, necessarily. You either do what I say, or you don't.
I think we all know that, Susan.
I don't know is the answer. As I say, I think it's because it grew out of the community rather than being imposed on the community. I think in a strange way, for all that Walton is a typical commuter belt, an awful lot of our community here don't come to the Barn because they go to London. They stay in London where they're working and their wives join them. Oh, I'm sorry, I was going to start. But yet there is a very strong sense of community in Walton. Let's put it this way, there is a very strong sense of communities in Walton. We're one of them, the church is one of them, and we've always worked with the churches, and one community overlaps with another. Our local schools are local. Those of us who live in the centre of Walton, whose children grew up here, they walked up to Ashley School, down the high street. I always felt I didn't need to worry about them because they were to fall down and hurt themselves. At least 5 other people would know who they were and pick them up. I've always said to my children, I'm not moving from here. Apart from anything else, I know that if I stand in the middle of Manor Road and shout for help, at least 3 people will come. And yet it's a strange community, because when you ask for, we asked for money from, for instance, from South East Arts initially, they came and they stood here and they said, Walton-on-Thames asking for money? There's so much money here, you don't need our money, we're needed here. And of course we are the most extraordinarily mixed community too. And what actually saddens me, I'm now rambling, stop me when you want me to stop, is that there are sections of the community who we don't see and don't come near us. I think it's less true now than it was. Walton North had nothing to do with us. That's partly because the things we can put on here, for instance, we can't make a lot of noise here. So if you want to put on pop music, you can't, or you shouldn't, let's put it that way, because your neighbours will object. That's me. And then, of course, if you cross New Zealand Avenue, I don't mean New Zealand Avenue, what do I mean? Yes, I do mean New Zealand Avenue. If you go the other side of New Zealand Avenue, it looks in the opposite direction. It shops in Weybridge. It doesn't shop in Walton. It belongs to St George's Golf Club. It has got a lot of money. And it, on the whole, so she's quickly looking around, who's here? On the whole, doesn't support us. We have some wonderful support from St George's and they are coming, you know, but it's wrong to categorise Walton as either, it was what do you call the area, Walton North was an area of deprivation or something. I don't know how the EU define these things. And of course, the wealthiest part of England is actually not Walton, but Oxshott, I think. But Walton and Weybridge come pretty close. But yet there's the centre of Walton, which is very close. The fact that our high street is dying, it's got to be, something's got to be done about it. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about the high street?
Maybe beyond the suggestions board, but we can start there.
Well, one of the things I want to do is we could take over one of the empty shops. Riverhouse could, and we did take it over for exhibitions at one, we had the tapestry that went there. And we could do performances there. The old vaccination centre, you know what I mean by vaccination? It's actually a perfect place for performance. It's got an upstairs with dressing room space, entrance down the stairs, lovely performance space. We could do things like that, and we have involved ourselves in things in the centre.
Susan, can I ask you something else? I've asked you quite a bit about volunteers who are very, very important to the Riverhouse, but I don't think anyone would disagree that this place would not run without some outstanding employees. It's invidious to really name people, but I am going to name. I know that Emily is behind our live stream at the moment, Emily, who's our artistic director, and Nigel, who you saw walk in earlier, and so many absolutely wonderful employees. How did it come about that the Riverhouse first had employees as opposed to volunteers?
Historically, when we opened, no one was paid. I was the first artistic director. I wasn't paid. No one was paid. When we built the gallery, one of the conditions that South East Arts put on giving us the grant was that we should have a paid education officer. And I think they also, well, they said we needed an education officer. I think the first gallery curator had to be paid. And that was the first paid jobs. Now our staff bill is quite large. And you're getting me on a sore point. We have some wonderful volunteers, and certain parts of the barn, for instance the cafe particularly, is dependent. Not dependent because it had paid staff as well, but it has volunteers. We have lost somehow the initial thing, which was something needs doing. We would say, what about asking Brown to do it? There's so many Browns. There was always a Brown who could do it. Or X will do it. We used to have what's called maintenance weekends, once every summer. Now, maintenance weekends were at a time when the building was fairly new. I mean, not that it was freshly painted. So there wasn't a great deal of very constructive work to be done, but everything needed to be painted, everything. And it was a lot of work for the people, the staff, who had to get it organised. And it wasn't always very well done. But it brought the community together over a weekend. I have to say the women once again made the tea and the lunch. Not always. But that was a bringing together of people to do things. We have lost that to a certain extent. I'm told that you can't get volunteers anymore. That it's gone out of fashion. There's a man over there who's my first failure. He has all the skills I want. I wanted as a volunteer for marketing. He's not joined. You're excused. There actually are many people. People are retiring earlier now, and some of the most important staff members we have are volunteers. Some of them because I knew a year before they were retiring and got them and said, "You're retiring in a year. We need you to come here." And Roger Huckabee, who is the treasurer of the barn, is still a volunteer. One of the major jobs. Jill Witham, who's just retired, was a volunteer for 20 years. She handled a box office ran into how many hundreds of thousands? I don't know, not hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands. There isn't a single art centre in the country that I know of that has a volunteer box office. And so on. How do we get them? We get them by asking them. We get them by them coming to things and realising we need them and volunteering. The law, of course, has changed. Everything is the law now. In my day, you just volunteered and you did it. Now you've got to fill in forms, you've got to have references, But still, these things can be overcome. Do you know they made me fill in a volunteers form?
Sorry, Susan.
This was a year ago or something. They came up and asked me to fill in a volunteers form. And they said, "Well, we've got to know your next of kin in case something happens." I said, "But you know my next of kin." Anyhow.
Susan, the terrible thing about getting lawyers in, as Oliver knows, is that we sort of insist on some forms being filled in. I'm very sorry. But it still remains the case, I think, that if someone wanted to... where's Jackie? I can see there. Wonderful Jackie.
I know, Jackie. I wasn't going to shame you.
Well, Jackie makes sure things run tickety-boo. But I'm sure that, for example, with front of house and things like that, you're always happy to have volunteers, aren't you? So I think the message I would just reiterate is if anyone does want to volunteer or does know of someone, please just get in touch because we'll find a way. And we're very keen to have people in the community doing things with the Riverhouse. Don't worry about the forms, we'll figure all that out.
No, you have to have the form.
Yes,
when we opened, every performance we had 7 volunteers on. 2 front of house, box office, 2 bar, me. And we did. And some of them were fantastic. Some of them were totally useless, but lovely, and members of the community, and supported us, and were non-discriminatory.
Susan, do you mind if I interrupt you? Because I can see there's some questions coming from the floor.
You're lucky you can see
There's
anything.
one here, and I've seen the lady over here as well.
It's not a question,
Oh.
it's a statement. Having been a volunteer since, it's like being a member of a family. When you come here, you're welcomed and it's enjoyable and pleasurable. That's the main reason I volunteer.
Hey!
My question is, what's the next phase? What's your ambitions for the next phase with the barn?
Don't ask me. The barn... I'm lost for words.
Are we recording this?
I would say to continue as we are. There's not much we can do to change the structure anymore. you might be interested, in fact, when we did the barn and as a performance space, I was told what you need is bleacher seating, which for somehow or other were terribly popular in those days. Are they still? I don't know. Yeah. Bleacher seating which is attached to a wall and then pulled open. And I said, well, that would be very restricting. If you have bleacher seating, you're end-on, which is, on the whole, pretty horrid, end-on. End-on is all right if you cut off a third of the barn. It's too long and narrow for that. Also, it stops what you're able to do. So we didn't have bleacher seating, and we bought this staging. And this staging, for those of you who don't know, has legs. 4 heights, Nigel?
4 heights.
4 heights. So we can have a rake when we want it, which we do for drama. We put the black curtains down, those who have not been drama production, and we have an end on stage. Sometimes we've done productions which can be ambulatory, up and down the centre of the barn. We once had a production of Benjamin Britten's Turn of the Screw, done by Charles Court Opera. It was amazing. We had to have, for them to get their licence to perform it, a full complement of particularly timpani, I remember, which the Britten Trust wouldn't let them do unless we had them. One drum, which I think played one note at some point, was enormous. I'll never forget that. We managed to get it in. We had a very small audience. But it was amazing. And they did the Madness of King George, which, again, John Savarin, who's now a big opera person, I can remember him walking out of the barn, singing. And it was just, you can do so much more. It's a very restricted space. One of the things we can't do in the barn is dance. It's too narrow. And one of the productions I can remember, if you're asking about what can I remember, was a solo performance of, I can't remember what it was called or who did it, but he was a goalkeeper in a football match. And he was performing. And he was throwing himself from one side of the goal to the other. And I was going like this. I can't bear it. He's going to hit the wall. In a minute, he's going to hit the wall. He didn't. It is very narrow. It's quite good for flamenco dancing. Because flamenco dancing tends to be in one place, doesn't it? You know, a lot of noise on the floor. It tends to be in one place. But anything else, it's pretty awful. It's all right for classes, as you know. We've still got some wonderful dance classes. It's no good for performance. It's the one thing we can't do. That we can't do, and we can't do loud things. So no pop music. What else can't we do?
We've done folk festivals, though, of course.
Yeah, folk festivals aren't pop music.
No, well, but yeah, obviously the noise levels are a consideration.
Big bands. I mean, I think the largest thing we can do on the stage, we've done the Trout Quintet, which, even though it's only 5 people, does have the grand piano as well. Then I would say, well, Brahms Sextet, that's about the most we can do on the stage. If we have a choir, is Valerie still here, Walford?
Yep.
How many people do we have singing? We had singing in the choir?
Oh, we have 14.
14. You stand on the rake, don't you?
But some behind others.
Yes. So, but that's end on, so we can do choirs. What can't we do?
We did look originally at theatre in the round as well. I remember a very early meeting when we came in with various diagrams and plans, seating that end, seating that end.
Oh, we do.
Theatre in the round.
We have done that. We've done that. Yeah. I mean, the point is, not having fixed seating means we can be very much more adaptable.
So it's very flexible.
But it is very small. And of course, this is our problem. It's one of our greatest strengths that we're small, because it means that staffing levels, this sort of thing, insurance, everything. And should there have been, in the early days, should we have gone into great financial trouble, we could have just closed, done something else. It also means that our audiences are small, which means our box office doesn't bring in as much as it might do. Well, everything has its disadvantages. I mean, I think it's lovely. But I can't, unless you can think of something else we could do here. Of course, the outside stage is a new thing. That came with COVID. I believe, Nigel, it's got to come down, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, it's not a permanent structure, so
Yeah.
it will come down, yes. Yeah.
You have to have planning permission for a permanent structure. We ain't got it. Well, they haven't been refused it. But only the English would sit in freezing cold, often in pouring rain, with umbrellas up, looking at outdoor theatres. I just can't believe it.
That was the Lost Folk Festivals in pouring rain, from recollection. I was just going to add, and I'm sure that David Rowan, who's sitting in the front row here, and Loretta, who's behind him, will correct me if I'm wrong, that like so many organisations of this nature, there has been a period of just keeping a steady ship during COVID, making sure finances are secure, that we are agile to move forward, and we're emerging out of that phase. We are going into a phase of looking very carefully at what in this magnificent building does need work, needs maintenance, to keep it safe, to keep it in good nick, and looking at the ways in which the Riverhouse is, I suppose, operating now. So streaming, I think, live streaming, recordings of events, that's probably here to stay, in common with a lot of other organisations. And we're looking at ways to sort of move forward. But I'm sure the directors will agree that we are just sort of in that stage of trying to plan forward again after a period of uncertainty in common with so many. And I think it's a tremendous thing that the support for the community cafe really helped us keep going during that very, very difficult period of COVID. So actually, every cup of coffee, everyone who came out walking a dog and bought a coffee or supported it, has actually contributed to us remaining on an even keel during a very rocky period. David, Loretta, anything you wanted to say about that?
Well, one of the things I was going to say actually about the outdoor stage was that some of these things that we're now doing came out of necessity from COVID. Sure. The outdoor stage helped us to be able to keep on putting on events and the live
Of course.
streaming. And of course we can now keep doing that, something we've learned how to do and can carry forward. So there have been some...
One of the great things that Emily, who's upstairs at the moment doing the live streaming, she is brilliant at filling in application forms. And having filled in quite a few over the years, the other person who's wonderful at it is Mike Botel, who did all the lottery applications for us, which are enormous they were. But don't do it. And one of the application forms that Emily filled in was the Arts Council was giving money to support places during COVID. And of course they gave us the money for cameras and so on, but they didn't take the things back again after COVID, which is great. We've got them and we're using them. And we can, for instance, one of the things we could do more of possibly is more live recording. And we're not a recording studio, so if people come, there are external noises, but what's called a live recording, and it's a wonderful acoustic for that. We could do more of that. I think we could possibly think of moving that direction. But it's funny how things come and go. I mean, I can remember when we did folk many years ago. Never sold. We never could sell folk concerts. Now it's one of the top-selling things we've got. Why? We're back to the community. We've got 2 people who've joined the barn fairly recently, volunteers, and who are great folk fans, who go to other folk concerts and venues, put our publicity in them. And we've now become a big folk venue, which is great because it's a perfect place for it. Puppetry. We used to do so much puppetry. No? Are there no puppeteers anymore? Why aren't we doing more puppetry? Modern jazz, up and down, really. It stays fairly static. It's not changed much. Classical music has always been fairly steady. I can't think of what other things we could do here. Caroline, have you got any?
Saying that comedy has been...
Comedy?
Yes.
That's a big one. We used to have a management committee. I think they still do have a management committee. I'm just not on it. And we used to sit around, and somebody called Paul James, I don't know how many of you remember Paul, why don't we do comedy? And I said, I have no idea. But if you want to do comedy, do it, and I will help you and back you as much as I want, as much as you want me to. We started doing comedy. We did no extra publicity for it, and it sold out from the beginning. Why? One of the reasons why is because it addresses an audience sector that we don't address that much, what I call the young middle-aged. It also allowed people in Walton to come, drink themselves silly and walk home. Very important. And I mean, it has been an amazing success, hasn't it, Nigel? I mean, comedy is just unbelievable. And yet, it was a fairly new thing. Anybody else has got something like that they can produce, any time we will find room for it and think. Anything else? Somebody suggest comment? Anybody else can think of we've done, not done?
Well, I've seen the flamenco suggestion has actually made its way to the suggestions board upstairs. If someone's already onto flamenco, so we'll look into that.
We have got somewhere, have we still got the dance floor, Nigel? The black?
Yes.
Yes, and we have, I must tell you about this floor. This floor came down after we'd done everything else. And there was a beautiful young New Zealander. What was his name? Who can remember his name? We all loved him. Anyhow, he put it down, and we loved this floor. And we had things that you couldn't wear heels if you came into the barn. You had to walk, take your shoes off. All sorts of things. We just loved it. Somehow it's got less love now. It needs redoing every now and then. Why did I start this conversation? Oh yes, but what we did have as well was black stuff that we rolled out if you wanted to do dancing. And we still got the dance floor, so we could put it down on top of the floor and we could do flamenco.
Good to know. I think there's another comment or question over here. Oh, sorry.
The most remarkable aspects of this place is the range of activities. And one of these is amplified. I don't know if Susan remembers this. Some years ago, there was a series of exhibitions about great artists. And it so happened, nearby, there was a jazz festival going on. And I contacted a friend of mine who was in this jazz festival. His name was George Millie, he was a jazz singer. But he was also an authority on surrealist art. And he came here and he did a lecture on surrealist art, which was a sellout. You remember it?
Yeah. I mean, the gallery is extraordinary because when we opened it, if you look upstairs, it says, this great thing which says the people great names who've been at the barn. Why am I making such a noise?
Is your microphone?
Yeah, your microphone.
Where am I?
I think you're okay. Your mic, it was just a bit of microphone rustle. You're fine.
Anyway, I'm fine. Where was I?
Gallery.
Gallery. And if you go and see this poster which says, these are the famous people who visited, it's got Matisse and Picasso. And they did visit because we used to be able to take touring exhibitions. So when we started, we had exhibitions from the Hayward Gallery and so on. Then they became all this law business again. We couldn't have them because we didn't have the right lighting, we didn't have the right heating, we didn't have the right insurance, so they had to go. So things come and go for different reasons. Where did I start? I can't remember. But yes, George Millie, yes. But that's, sorry, he came and said, yes.
Was there a hand I missed over here earlier?
No.
Was there a question or a comment?
I've told you everything you want to know.
Well, I was just going to ask you, actually, on the subject of the gallery, when did the gallery open? Can you just go back to that?
Yes,
and how that came?
99. 99. Sorry? Was it 2000, not 99? No, 2000. Right. We got one lottery application, and we got it. We thought, oh, we'll go for another. And we went for another to build that end. And the gallery. And we got a gallery curator. We did a lot more curated exhibitions in those days. I mean, apart from the travelling exhibitions, Vivian, who was the inspiration behind the gallery, coordinated, brought together the most wonderful exhibitions and come lectures which went with it, including one which was by an architect who did one of the big local sustainability projects architecturally. And was telling us, of course, we shouldn't have fires. And I remember putting up my hands and saying, what do you do when you live in a 15th century manor house. And can we put solar panelling on? He said, you leave it just as it is. I thought, right, that's good. That got me out of that one. So things come and go, things change, tastes change. I'm sad that our children's, not that our children's shows have stopped, they've come, but the support for our children's work has lessened. I think it's partly because the schools no longer come to things, and they don't come because the teacher will tell you that actually getting the paperwork together to bring a class out, to hire a van or a bus to bring them down. And I was really sad, for instance, at this last Christmas, how few schools came. I mean, Ashley always used to walk down. Grovelands, I can't remember what it was to, but I can remember Grovelands walking all the way down in the pouring rain to something, and we had to strip them, and we had to find we all had to take our own pullos off to get them. And that has gone, and that saddens me. I think the schools are much more inward looking, and possibly looking at what we should be doing in the future, we should be taking more into the schools. Rather than asking the schools to come here, we should be going to the schools. As we did, for instance, with the big project we did teaching kids to play the violin and the cello, and it started String Along, which started here, and then we took it into the schools, and they worked. So there is scope for doing it, and I think this is possibly what we should be looking at more. Because otherwise the schools are just going to lose out on live drama, live music.
I think we're very keen, if we can, to sort of plug back into the school community where we can. There have been some really excellent children's theatre productions in recent times. I know my two really enjoyed seeing Red Riding Hood just before the Christmas break, and indeed some really good things coming on.
No, there are. It's just, it saddens me we're not involving as many children, and particularly going back to the sort of split communities. We're talking to the same people, the same local community, and we're not getting kids from Grovelands. There's some interesting geographical divides in this borough and outside. I mean, the first one, of course, is the road over Hampton Court Bridge. You're either this side of it or you're that side of it. If you're this side of it, you look to Molesey, Walton, everything. If you're that side of it, you look to Kingston. No. Then there's New Zealand Avenue, which is another one. You know that way? Or or you're here. Walton North, it's difficult. The schools up there, it's difficult to get them. And when one time we did meals during school holidays, and the very people we wanted to come, or not wanted to come, but needed to come, didn't, because they were the wrong side of Terrace Road. You know, they go to another church. And if you're not in that church, and I'm not talking about the Catholics, I'm talking about the Church of England, St Mary's, you have to go to whatever the other one is, the opposite. What is the middle school up there? What is the school? Walton. Cleves. Walton Oak. Oh, yeah. Walton Oak. Everything changes. And they just don't come, and that is sad. And we ought to have a little bridge over Terrace Road.
Well, at least we're getting a bridge at the train station, so that's something at least. Yeah. But for all of my friends in the audience who, we've had to take buggies over the steps and stuff, well, that's at least welcome. But one thing, in terms of bringing engagement back to school communities, or indeed engagement with any number of people, I'm going to use this opportunity, if I may, to conduct a very rough poll, which is about marketing. Now, traditionally, as you all know, everyone would get literature through the post, you would get a leaflet or a brochure, and indeed we still have them at the theatre for you to pick up. But we're living in an age, to put it bluntly, where a lot of people have to engage with social media. It's almost as though an event is not in existence unless someone has Instagrammed it or put it on Facebook or whatever else. And we are trying to engage with all forms of marketing in the best way possible. It would be good to know who still really values having a brochure in our foyer to look at, or who actually is happy to look at the website. If you would prefer to have written literature that you can pick up, will you put a hand up? Okay.
Yes,
If you follow Riverhouse on either Facebook or Instagram, put a hand up. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say your audience.
the audience here is elderly. Some of us are elderlier than others. I think that, I mean, the thing that also gets me on that one is, Anne was saying she'd like it delivered. We can't afford to post. I don't know about this, we can't afford to post. I think that posting out 3 times a year, which we used to do, I don't know what it used to cost us, but I bet it got us more back in revenue than it cost us to post. And even now with the postages. And I think actually people like, certainly my generation, likes to have a solid copy which is posted to them. And, you know, we don't, not all of it, some of us haven't got computers at all. And even if we've got them, we're not very good at using them. And to tell people to book online, some people can't because they haven't got a computer or because they can't. I'll tell you something, I had to fill in an ESTA form. You know what an ESTA form is? ESTA form is something for getting into America. It's not a sort of, I've done it before and it's been all right. This time I went online and I had to call Alex. May I introduce Alex? Alex lives in Manor Road, and if you live in Manor Road, you'll know that Alex will always help you with your computer. He used to run that wonderful the shop where you could go and get your cartridges filled game, the print shop. He's wonderful. Anyhow, I could not do that. Now, I'm quite good on a computer, thanks to Alex, but there was no way I could upload a photograph. I can download all sorts of things, but upload a photograph? And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but it's not my generation. And why should I be dependent on it to get a doctor's appointment? Let's not go there.
So I think, I mean, we obviously have to look at ways that are going to entice and attract everyone who's interested in coming to this place. So that means looking at diverse ways of marketing. But if you are someone who happens to be on Instagram or Facebook, please follow Riverhouse. If you're having a particularly tasty meal in the community cafe, please just take an arty photo of your quiche or whatever it is you're eating and make sure you put it on Instagram, because if you don't, it didn't happen. And we'll also... But I think we're looking very carefully. It's really important. I can see it as very important, and to the directors and everyone at Riverhouse, it's really important to make sure we engage with everyone in a way that's accessible and means continued support.
I still think it is amazing how many people in Walton still say to you, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about Riverhouse. I've never heard of it. And I think, in a way, we've got to start trying to find a way of this community of getting out more information. Just passing by, the information on the notice boards are out of date.
Are they?
Some of them are. This is not good either. I think we should be looking to make sure always that everything's up to date. Maybe the week when we go into the cafe, that there's something on the tables for each thing coming up within that week or that fortnight. But certainly, my neighbours, 3 of them, had never heard of the barn.
I know of people living in Manor Road who don't know we're here. You know, who walk past the end of the posters may be out of date, but they are visible from Manor Road, who don't know we exist. You know, and it is a problem.
I know for sure that my neighbour knows about the Riverhouse because I've been trying for years to get her to enter the Great British Bake Off or something, but she has instead, there she is on the front row, I'll just embarrass her. She has instead been baking for the Riverhouse.
Just for for balance, could we also acknowledge the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who come through here who do know about the Riverhouse?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
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 I was going to say as well, actually, that over the past, I don't know, 10 years or so, and I remember sort of coming here with my children, and it used to be, you know, we had to ring up to book tickets or come in person or whatever. And that's changed, and I know that sort of when things were updated, everything went, you know, on email, and you could go, and that's great. I'm not on Twitter or, you know, I'm on Facebook, but I don't have Twitter or TikTok or anything like that, probably because of my age, whatever. But I do get, you know, I love the emails, and that's really accessible. And I get every month I get your listings and whatever. And you can also now book as well. You know, over the past 7, 8 years, whatever. Now we can book online, and that's really accessible.
I'm not denying.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
you know, but apart from it's also looking at the demographic of our audience.
Yeah. That's great, because
We will all have died out.
We won't allow it, Susan.
As well, most people now sort of do have email. And for a few people that don't, you still have that option where you can pick up a leaflet. Now I'm very much a tactile person. I still have I like to have things written down or leaflets too as well. And you've got the option of picking up something here, or you can also have email, or you can pick up something there and then go home with that paper copy. And then if you want to ring up or get your tickets, you can do that. You've got an option, which is great. So you can either do it, you know,
But you've
ringing
got
up.
to know the place and you've got to be here to get it. That's
Yeah,
the problem
yeah.
we're talking about, attracting people from other areas.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think we probably just have time for a couple more questions, if that's all right, Susan. There's another question or comment?
Just a comment, just to say, I'm bringing 13 to your Burns night supper, and it may seem amazing that I think once we've had our supper and haggis and a dram of whiskey, you'll be moving back the tables and we'll be charging up and down the hall.
That sounds very good
To a
indeed.
piper. Oh!
The piper's only on to piping people in. He's not going to be here the whole evening.
Oh, right.
I know Kaylee. So if people haven't booked, it's on the 27th. It's going to be Bird's Night Supper. Do come. We've still got tickets.
Brilliant. So I'm just going to round off with a couple of words, if I may. First of all, let's keep this conversation going. If there's one thing we can take away from this afternoon, it is what you've often told me, Susan, that the Riverhouse is by the community for the community. It is your Riverhouse. So if you go away and you've got further thoughts, just get in touch. And I don't mind if you email us, drop a note in, whatever is easiest. Just tell us what it is that you would like to help with in the first instance. Or that you'd like us to look into, or see if we can arrange it, or do something better, because we're always open to those ideas and suggestions. So please keep engaging and keep, this is your Riverhouse. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, huge thanks to Susan for taking the time and trouble to share that very important history of the Riverhouse with us this afternoon, and for everything, absolutely everything she's done for the Riverhouse to date. Can we show our appreciation in traditional way? Look forward to seeing you at future events, and thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Susan.